right, great. I'm gonna shift over to talking about heat distribution. So this is a extremely complex topic that hits every building that has central heating, which is that you have a situation where one apartment, one line, one section, a whole building is cold, and what the heck do you do about it? And before I dig into that, I just want to give a refresher on how generalized heating systems work so everybody understands what we're talking about. So, one pipe systems, this is a steam system. You have steam that comes from the boiler, right? Cold water comes in, the boiler burns oil or gas, heats a pot of water. That water goes up as steam and then goes up the risers and then comes right back down when it condenses back into the boiler via the same pipe. A hydronic system is sort of similar, except it just loops backwards and it's just hot water. A two-pipe steam system has a separate pipe where the water you have the steam rise through the risers, right? And then it comes back through the radiators through a separate pipe when it condenses as hot water. So this is generally just like a very simple diagram. Obviously, you have three-way valves, vacuum, city steam. There are a whole bunch of different systems, but in general, you can think of it like one or two pipes going through a building and something coming back. So the challenge is what happens when somebody says it's too cold in my apartment and you actually know it's too cold. So the first thing is, if you don't have indoor sensors with some kind of smart control, it's very hard to do anything because you don't know if the person's actually just cold when it's actually warm or if the apartment's actually cold, and you have no idea what the other apartments are doing. So if you do have sensors in the apartment, the first thing you want to look at, and I sort of broke this down into this chart here, is where is the issue? Is it in a single apartment? Is it a single line, or the whole building, or a giant chunk of the building? Because it really changes your approach to how you look at it. And there are mainly three different areas that can be affected: apartment issues, distribution issues, and boiler issues. Apartment issues are things that are usually very specific to the apartment. Distribution issues are usually very specific to the section of the building, and they're usually how the steam or the hot water is moving through the building. And then there are boiler issues or heating system issues, which are the centralized issues. So does anybody have any questions so far about what I've gone over? Okay.
I understand.
I'm sorry, what?
I understand so far. Because
Okay.
I get a lot of, like you're saying, certain parts of the building say I'm comfortable, but in certain units, sporadically in different lines say my apartment's cold. What can you do? And a lot of times it's mostly like in the middle of the night, it's not early in the morning.
Correct. So the first thing you want to figure out is single apartment, single line, or a whole chunk of the building, right? And then while you're doing that, you need temperature data. So either you're using sensors that are already installed, or you need to literally go to all the apartments and actually measure them with a laser gun to know what the temperatures are. Somebody complains and says it's too cold, and you just turn up the central heat. That is exactly why every building in New York City runs at like 79 or 80 degrees, because we don't know if it's a single apartment. We can't fix the problem. And if we just run the heat to cover it up, you're going to waste a ton of money. So Tasha just said, when a tenant calls that they're cold, besides checking the sensors, we send our supers into the apartments with a thermometer. I love that. So that was going to be my next thing. If somebody is consistently cold or really is calling, and you can't understand why they're cold, you absolutely should send somebody with a gun, a temperature gun or an air thermometer, to go to the apartment and actually measure the apartment and make sure that it is actually cold and know how cold it is. So, Natasha, thank you for adding that. So now you know.
Lee, a question.
Yeah, shoot.
On the laser guns, are they measuring air temperature or surface temperature?
Surface temperature. So they're not. There's no perfectly accurate system. I actually like the almost like turkey baster. You wave it in the air and you get a decent reading if it's a precise thermometer, but a little good. You can also, you aim it at a few walls. Don't aim it at a wall right next to the window or right next to a stove or something. You get a pretty good approximation of what the temperature is in the unit. So, okay, so now we know the temperatures and we can start diving into what's going on. Anybody want to take a guess at the most common reason that a single apartment or a few apartments might be cold when the rest of the building is warm?
Windows are open.
Open windows, yep, drafty open windows,
You got
or
it.
air conditioners.
Or air conditioners. You got it. So I'm going to tell a classic story. When I met my wife in 2018, I would tell her what I did, and I would say to her, you know, like, one of the biggest problems is slightly open windows. Buildings run way too much heat just because there's a couple of apartments with slightly open windows. And she literally said to me, she's like, how could anybody be so stupid to have their window open and not realize that's the reason their apartment is cold? So I said, you'd be surprised. Fast forward, no joke, 2 weeks later, we're sitting in the living room in her apartment, and she says to me, you know, I got to call the building because I think my like heating system is broken in my bedroom because it's always freezing in my bedroom and it's so warm in the living room. And I said, let me go take a look. And I go in and I look at the window, and it's a typical double pane, you know, double hung window. And of course, at the top, 1/8 of an inch, the window is open, right? And freezing cold 28-degree air is just pouring into her bedroom. So I tell this story because my wife is a lawyer, right? Incredibly well educated, has an Ivy League degree. And even she, after me telling her about this, still couldn't see the issue in her apartment. So, you know, this is just so common. It's a tiny little opening at the top or the bottom. People don't see it. They don't realize, and it lets in a ton of cold air. So the first thing you want to look for is open windows. The second is you want to make sure the radiators are open. Again, I cannot tell you how many times I've seen buildings literally just jack up the boiler because a bunch of apartments had the radiators closed and didn't realize it, or the valve is broken or stuck and they can't open it. Very critical to find these, check these, and make sure they're open. And then, as Steve said before, AC units. It is worth, I can't emphasize this enough, you know, at a central property management level, you know, sometimes there's sort of a mentality that it's like, well, the AC unit is like the tenant's responsibility, like they should deal with it. It is worth your time and money to help them remove it, or at least buy weatherproofing to seal it with plastic, because what ends up happening, actually, does anybody want to explain why one apartment or a few apartments with AC units or closed radiators or open windows can fundamentally affect the budget of the building?
Because you're losing your heat.
You're losing your heat. Exactly. And what happens? The tenant has an AC unit in, it's not insulated, there's just air pouring in that window, they're cold, they call the super at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night, it's too cold in my apartment. Super takes a look at the temperature sensors, 65 degrees in their apartment. Oh, you're right. Let me just turn up the temperature in the building, right? So now every 1 degree of set point in a building is somewhere around 8 to 10% of the energy usage. So the super goes and says, you know what? I had the setting set to 73. Let me set it to 74 now, right? Boom. 10% of your energy budget is gone in 2 minutes. So this is why it's so critical to we recommend every heating system. You do a walkthrough of all the apartments, you check the windows are closed, you help people remove or insulate with weatherproofing their AC units, make sure the valves are working on radiators, opened up, so that we can make sure that we're running the minimum amount of heat for everybody in the building. I think Jesse and Mary have their hands raised. Mary, you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. So all of the things that you're describing, we've come across. And every time we do have somebody that's colder than other people, we send up the super. Our problem is, and we've addressed this in the past, our runtime seems to be so short that by the time the super gets up there to see if the radiator is working, the heat's gone off again. So that continues to be a problem for us. And the other question is it the best thing to do to put sensors in the worst complainers? You know, the people who are claiming they're the coldest, is that the best place to put the sensor? And if we do that, okay, will that bring the heat up sooner, because the more apartments that are registering cold will turn the heat on sooner, correct?
Yeah. So you asked 2 questions. The first one specifically about your runtime. that's a very specific building issue. And I don't want to just give you a generalized answer. I can say that if you're seeing that in general, the top apartments are cold consistently, probably it's not running enough, but I would want to actually look at the building. What I would recommend is, Dan Abbott is on the call. He suggested it before. I would call the support number or call your client success manager and say, hey, I want you to look at this. I think the heat might not be running enough. They will look at it very specifically and they'll give you very building specific feedback or make changes with you to address that issue. That's your best ticket. The reason that we invest a lot in our support team and our client success team is that you can have the best technology in the world, but if somebody's not actually looking at the building and trying to address issues on a human level, you will never run an efficient building. So you should take it. I highly recommend everybody take advantage of that. You have problems, call, let us work on it with you. Let's fix it. The second issue asked about putting sensors in the coldest apartments. I think it's important to generally cover all the riser lines because you want to make sure you know what's happening across the building. But I do recommend putting it in usually the coldest or most complaining apartments as well, because that does give you sort of the baseline of like where things are and where people who are complaining, what the temperature actually is in their apartments. And yes, it will run the heat a little bit more, but I think that's okay if you have a number of apartments that are cold. We want to make sure we don't want anybody to be cold, right? That's the opposite of the goal. We want everybody to be comfortable, but run, an energy efficient building while everybody's comfortable. Great. So we look at single apartment issues first, right? If a single or a couple of apartments are complaining, the first thing you're going to look at are apartment issues because it's almost certainly that. Next, if there are no apartment issues, the next thing you want to look at is distribution issues. So that could be traps and vents, depending on if you have a 1 or 2 pipe system. You want to so this is a common issue, and this is more of the first thing you want to look at if there's a line that's an issue. So for example, if you look at a building, we'll go back to the diagram we had before. If 3 of these lines are really warm and 1 is cold, right? It could be that there's wind or sun or something like that. So that's always a possibility. But you definitely want to look at distribution issues here. And what distribution issues are, if you take a steam system as an example, steam is coming from the boiler and going through and rising up these pipes. If air gets caught in these pipes, what happens is the air pushes the steam back, and so the steam will move more slowly. So while line 2, 3, and 4 here might have steam that's getting all the way to the top apartment in 7 minutes and then running for 30 minutes afterwards, in line 1, because there's so much air pushing back against the steam, it may take 30 minutes to get the steam to the last apartment, and it's only getting 5 minutes of heat. So that's a very typical situation you see in 1 and 2 pipe systems. You really want to make sure your venting and your steam traps are working properly. It's an art more than it is a perfect science. So if you need a vendor to do that, we're happy to recommend 1 or a couple. But you really want to make sure your vents and your steam traps are working and properly engineered. I see all the time, I see gigantic vents like in the wrong places. I don't see the proper size vents at the top. Exactly. Air valves on the top line need to be changed. You want to put in the proper size. You want to put them at the proper spacing. This is critical to getting steam through the building really quickly. Can anybody try to take a guess at why this is so critical for saving money?
Well, if the system's working too hard, it's going to require more energy to make the system work efficiently.
Correct. If all the steam, if you imagine you look at this boiler, right? And all the steam is getting trapped at this beginning section here, where before it even gets to the risers or the beginning part of the riser, you can be burning oil and gas all day long, but it's not actually getting into the building. Sandy, you want to say what you just wrote? Because I think that's another great point.
Well, people have their apartments painted and painters drip paint everywhere. And one of the big places is, I don't know why, but on these radiators, you go look at a valve and it's completely closed up with paint. Maybe because they painted the radiator and then they just slop paint on the air valve as well. So that's often a place with problems. Painting.
Yeah. And if you can't, if the valve is closed, you can't get air out through the
I mean,
valve, but therefore it gets trapped.
Ahí agarramos la nevera, nevera. En la nevera, ¿en cuál nevera? En la.
Okay, so those are distribution issues. At the same time as you're looking at distribution issues, you should absolutely look at insulation. Anybody know why insulation is so critical?
Keep the heat in, keep the cold out.
Exactly. If you have a giant rise, right? If the boiler is making a ton of steam and it goes up through this main line and there's no insulation on the main line, you're just pouring the steam out into essentially the heat out into the boiler room, right? Or into the walls. So before you even get to the building. So those are very, very high ROI measures. Venting and insulation will pay for themselves very quickly. Make sure you're doing that.
Yeah, if you're in a small co-op, it's really hard to maintain that because some people are very resistant and reluctant to put money into their units, and we can't force it to happen. There are some people in my building who have just literally the wrong type of radiation system for our two-pipe steam system, and they refuse to change it. So we're kind of stuck in those units. So I frankly have turned their sensors off, and excuse my French, but screw them.
Yep. And I see this in particularly really high-end co-ops, like $20 million apartment. You'll have a building and they'll take out the big cast iron radiator and they'll put in like a fan, like a coil unit or a tiny little radiator because it looks nicer. And then they complain that it's too cold in their apartment and they want the central system to run twice as much to heat their apartment. So I very much, and Sandy's an expert at this, would recommend if you're on a co-op board, you do not let people downsize those radiators. You want the radiators to be properly and equally sized across the building so you're not running the heat just to heat one or two apartments.
Well, when that ship has sailed, it's hard to bring it back.
Harder. It is harder. One of the things I have seen buildings do is offer to pay to put the an older radiator in. It can be a multi-$1,000 expense, but if you can run the heating system less, because you don't have to run it 15% more to pay to heat one apartment, you can often save money. Building by building, also what Karen's saying, hey, you took it out, it's your problem, put on a jacket, another solution.
Sorry to interrupt for a second. Can you go back to steam traps for a minute and how are steam traps meant to be maintained? And I've been in discussion with our super about that, and I just want to make sure I'm presenting him with the correct information.
Dan Abbott, do you want to jump in on this one?
Yeah, I mean, if possible, you want to check them every year, but usually they need to be replaced once every 3 to 4 years.
Replaced?
Yeah, that's kind of the life of a steam trap. They may last longer, but if they're older than that, there's a much higher likelihood of failure.
And steam traps, sorry to dominate this for a minute, but steam traps that I'm familiar with are mostly in our basement, and the super is opening them up and letting some water run to let the rust out and whatever. If anything else, it's mostly just some rusty water. Is there anything else he should be doing? And should we be looking at steam traps elsewhere in the building? This is a 100-plus-year-old building.
So Karen, are you guys, when you're up in the units, is it 1 or 2 pipe?
It's a two-pipe. It's a two-pipe.
Okay,
Except
so
for the
yeah, I
people
mean,
who change their systems to the one pipe.
I mean, it's that is the drawback to
Yeah.
steam trap maintenance. It is to check 100 or if there's a however
Thankfully,
many
only 20
apartments
units.
times X, however many radiators and everything in those apartments, it can be labor intensive. So what does end up happening is it's more of a reactive thing. You tend to check steam traps if there's a problem with the heating or there's radiators aren't heating up. But there's some companies do service steam traps, so there are vendors out there that's their that's one of their specialties. They'll inspect and replace steam traps that aren't working. So if a steam trap isn't working, and it's closed, it's going to be apparent because the radiator is not going to get hot enough. It's not going to heat up. If it's open, that can be a little less obvious because the radiators will heat up. The problem there is you're wasting energy by instead of having that trap closed and the steam gets distributed further out in the building, it takes longer for other parts of the building because steam is just can going right past through your radiator and back into the condensate return. But yeah, I mean, as far as inspecting them, if possible, you want to run your boiler, build up a good head of pressure, and just the best way is to kind of go apartment by apartment, even though it is labor intensive. And you can, if a professional is doing it, you can use infrared imaging. They use I am forgetting the word. Lee, what do we use for our live riser? What's the
What are you talking
basically they're detecting both temperature and sound. You can check our ways to check.
Oh, like acoustic monitoring.
There's different ways to check it. But yeah, in reality, because it is labor intensive, it tends to be sort of a reactive measure. In a perfect world, which doesn't, again, in a lot of these buildings, it's definitely not a perfect world, but in a perfect world, you'd be able to have kind of, someone go through and just check radiator by radiator to see how things are going every year.
But his flushing of the steam traps in the basement, is that helping, or is that kind of?
I mean, it shouldn't be hurting. I mean, if they're filled with debris and yes, you want to clean those out, but that's something I would, I'd talk to your boiler service company, like, hey, this is what we've been doing to maintain the steam trap. Is this what you'd recommend? Are we missing anything? Is there anything else we should be doing? So
I may reach out to you later to get a vendor suggestion.
Yeah, we can talk later.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And then Natasha pointed out something that I didn't mention about an in-unit issue, which is tenants blocking radiators with furniture. And I was literally in a incredibly high-end Central Park West co-op building a couple of years ago, and there was one individual tenant. The entire building was warm. One tenant was freezing, and I go into the unit, and they had built 7-inch thick wood boxes with no venting, no holes over the radiators that were they were beautiful decorative wood pieces, but I went in and he was like, the system doesn't work, it's just not providing heat. And I went over and I opened the box, and I opened the box on all the radiators, and within 5 minutes the environment was warm, right? So that type of thing happens. It's crazy, but it does happen. We have questions coming in. We have, sorry. Steve?
Yes. Is there any way for a building with a large horizontal footprint to determine or allocate steam to the furthest apartments first? In other words, valve on the steam lines to regulate distribution. And this is a building we've done steam balancing, but it's because it's so spread out horizontally, the last apartments at the last wing at the top are always cold.
Is this a 1 or 2 pipe or a vacuum system?
It's a 1-pipe system, and we have a pump condensate. We have a condensate tank with a pump on it.
Got it. DA, do you know the answer?
So, I mean, not necessarily. Sometimes these issues are not. It's not like, oh, here's the fix and magically solves these. But without knowing more, I would. One thing would be to sort of progressively smaller vents. If you have vents on the main.
Well, we've had that done. We've had that professionally.
Yeah, I mean,
the whole
that's
building steam balance.
So I mean, that's why this can be difficult. I mean, if you start tinkering around with actually changing in and out fixtures, it also can get expensive. But you could also sort of retry. All right, we've got these smaller. So basically, you would want these smaller vents. The further away from the boiler, the larger the vents, so the steam can get
right
to those areas quickly. I mean, a sort of almost a tweaking of the vents sizes could be something that may work, but it is the other part of it is that far one riser more exposed? Could that also be part of the issue?
No,
that's not.
No, I'm aware of that solution, and we've checked that. I was just wondering if there was something more on the distribution side, like on the main steam lines if there could be valves going.
Steve,
Is-
I don't know. There may be a solution to it. I think it's a very specific issue that requires an engineer's touch. If you haven't been able to get your boiler service company to come up with something smart, I know one of the top engineers in the city who, like, I would trust his judgment. He may say, look, there's just nothing you can do, but he also, if there is something to do, he'd be the person I trust. I'm happy to connect you to him if it's helpful.
Okay, we can talk offline.
Great. Okay, so I want to wrap this up quickly, but so single line, you think distribution issues first, and then boiler issues, then apartment issues, and then whole building or large chunks of the buildings, you're thinking boiler issues. So what are some of these boiler issues? Well, the most common one is you're stuck in low fire or short cycling. And what that means is that the boiler is basically like sort of turning on, like not really getting into high fire, like sort of coming back down. And like you never build enough pressure and steam going through for a long enough period of time to actually get this through the system. And a lot of times it's hard to know this is happening. So the best way to see this is this type of thing where like the boiler's running a lot, and it says that on Runwise, and we'll throw an alert usually when we detect this, but like the boiler's running a lot, but you're just like the apartments are cold across the building or a huge chunk of them, that you definitely want to get that fixed. Your boiler service company should take a look at that. Other things that could be wrong, you could be running with not enough pressure, you're running too much pressure. You really want to make sure these things are dialed in correctly. Our support team can help you with that. Or you just have, you have a tremendous leak. If you have a tremendous return line leak and all the water is spilling out underground and you have no idea about it, you're reheating water constantly, takes a lot of energy. You're never really getting that hot water fast enough up into steam. So those are when you have a huge chunk, that's where you want to look. In every situation, you can have a combination of these things. So you always want to look at them, but this is sort of like the priority order of how to do it. And then sort of the last thing that I, like to talk about is you really want to make sure that you're detecting issues. And like I sort of just gave an example of talking about the system detecting that the boiler's down, or that it's stuck on low fire, or there's a return line leak. Those things are critical because you may have heat in the building, but it just may not be getting to the whole building. And if it's because of the boiler, you need to know about it and you need to be able to fix it. And so we do try to highlight that, but this is sort of a good framework for how to actually address it. I'm going to turn it over to questions now. People have questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jan.
I do.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
This may sound really naive, but if one has in-wall radiator and ACs are covered, windows are closed, blah, 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 would it help to put tin foil behind the heating element in the wall?
So some people do that. Dan, you want to answer it?
I mean, I would say, this is, I'm not an expert on this like particular piece of equipment or what, but tinfoil may or may not be effective, but there are actually like inserts that that both insulate and kind of reflect the heat back out. So that is an option. Now, tinfoil, I don't know that would hurt. It may or may not be super effective, but the equipment designed to do that, like it's the same principle, and yeah, that is something that we've seen.
Where would one get that material?
I think you can. It's called heat reflective insulation. If you go to like Home Depot and you tell them what you want,
Okay.
it's like like literally a piece of material you can put behind the radiator and it'll reflect it. Again, the jury's out on how much this really helps, but what I usually recommend is run experiments. Try it. Take it. You know what the history of the apartment temperature is in an apartment, right? And if people complain in that apartment, try it in 2 apartments, see if it helps either move the temperature or reduce complaints. If it does, okay, it's a pretty inexpensive way of doing it. If it's not, then you move on.
Thank you.
Sandy, you raise your hand.
Yeah. Couple things. Another thing to think about or talk to when you get complaints is see what the person in that apartment is wearing in the middle of the winter. It's always been one of my biggest things. Now, I used to live in a house, and I now live in in a loft apartment downtown where I have to pay for all my heat and electric because I have split systems. So, because when it comes out of your pocket, you figure out ways on how to not spend the money and maybe put on a vest or a long sleeve sweater as opposed to a t-shirt in the middle of the winter and during the day. So some of these people are complaining, but yet they don't want to take any personal assist on any personal level to make their life more comfortable. It's always the building's fault, and the building's fault again. This kind of program is really, really helpful. And I'm thinking that maybe Runwise might want to put something together for supers to come in on a webinar and go through the panel with them and help them learn how to make the adjustments. Because as you know, when they get a complaint, and I've heard Karen and Jen both said this, the super runs and raises the temperature because they don't want to be bothered to once again, and this is from the best supers, they want to be everybody's friend. They don't want people to hate them because they live with them. I don't live with them, so it's okay if they hate me.
I live with them and they hate me, and I'm not the super. Because I say, screw you if you're not.
Yeah, but you're not on,
the issues.
you're not on salary, so it doesn't matter.
No, I'm not. This is all volunteer work, and I
Right,
should
exactly. So the super, I could bring supers in who I would love to get a little bit more sophisticated on what they're seeing on that panel and what it means to them.
I think it's a great idea. I'm gonna actually punt that over to our CSM
And
team.
it would also need a Spanish speaking person on that call.
Yeah, I think it's really smart. Really smart. I'm gonna make that suggestion. And also what Sandy said about people wearing, like their underwear in the middle of winter in their apartment. We see this all the time. This is again where knowing the temperature in the apartment is helpful. If it's 74 degrees, you can say, hey, look, it's 74 degrees. You come up, you measure it. It is indeed 74 degrees. It's warm enough in this apartment. If you're cold, like we can't overheat the building. And one of the nice things now is, which didn't exist 5 years ago, is you can actually blame the city. You can say the city has put carbon caps on buildings. They are requiring us by law to run an efficient heating system. We cannot overheat the building anymore.
Yeah, but Lee, come on. The city might have laws, but the inspectors don't. And the inspectors, if they're called, they're just going to cause you trouble. So we're all between a rock and a hard place. You don't want an inspector in to give you a heat violation.
Correct. Which is why you want to know the temperature in the apartment and make sure that it is actually warm enough and that you are providing enough heat. Other questions?
Real quick, because I know we're running out of time here, and I can, we can answer. I can stick around extra if people have questions. But I did want to say, especially for newer installations or systems that were put in over the summer, if there's any doubt of what's going on, contact us at support, because sometimes, especially if we haven't had a chance to see what the building was like before we put our system in, the change is so drastic initially that people don't even bother calling us. They assume there's a boiler issue when there isn't, and they end up unnecessarily calling in boiler service company when it's something that we could probably solve with some settings adjustments. So especially early on with any buildings, any questions at all, take advantage of the 24/7 support, because a lot of times it'll help everyone, solve the issue much more quickly.
For additional can that be done?
I have a question.
Wait, sorry, the person on the phone, 929, what was your question?
For the sensors in certain apartments, I got 2 buildings here in the Bronx. I got one building that's 6 stories, one building that's 8 stories. Certain units got the sensors that go like halfway through the building, like for the 8th story, one goes up to the 4th floor, for the 6th floor up to the 3rd floor. Can we get additional sensors for the other floors in certain units?
Absolutely. Reach out to support at runwise.com, or you can call the phone number on the website. They'll definitely help you with that.
Okay, cool.
Edward, you had a question?
Yeah. What is the average temperature that you should keep on the apartment? Because I have it at 71, and I have one tenant who is complaining at least 5 times a day to HPD. HPD comes in and walks out. So what would a number be that would work? Because I thought 71 is above the city's threshold. What are other people keeping it at?
I mean, I
give
could
it
take that one.
72.
Yeah, Dan, you want to go
Uh,
for it? This is Dan's life.
I mean, yeah, if only there was a one size fits all answer to that question. You know, I can take a look at your buildings in particular, because sometimes there's little nuances of, you know, certain times of day. There's the regular set point, but there's the mild weather. But I would say 71, you know, is a reasonable number, but is most of our buildings are between 71 and 73, I would say, are the set points. But we also have buildings where, you know what, we want no complaints. We don't want things running out of control, but keep this at 75, 76. So, you know, it part of it is sort of couple of things. What's the priority between keeping everyone comfortable and saving? The other is, you know, is a very real thing. If you start having HPD making problems, you know, sometimes it is, you know, it is better to err a little bit on the side of warmer. The other thing is that, you know, at 71, if you're having a lot of complaints, it means you're probably saving from how the system was, you know, the output of the system prior to putting in Runwise. You probably have a little wiggle room. But like I would say in this situation, two things. Short term, you could bump up that set point by 1. I would also, you know, make sure, and you may have already done this, go to the apartment with a reliable temperature sensor, and that doesn't magically solve the problem. But if you're dealing with an objective number, at least you're starting to get the conversation to something that, you know, that everyone can understand, rather than I'm too hot, I'm too cold, which, you know, everybody has a different threshold on that. So, so yeah, but to answer your original question, 71 is reasonable, but I would say, you know, you wouldn't be irresponsible to bump that up to 72. And especially if you're having a range in the building, that means some people will be 69, 70, some people will probably be 73, 74.
And Ron is giving you the legal limits, which is, you know, obviously
Yeah.
60 and 62. But as Sandy said before, you don't want to run your building with, like, you know, like people being cold and complaining. It just never pays dividends. And like the goal is to make the building comfortable, like genuinely comfortable within reason, but like try to run it efficiently while doing so.
Can I make a suggestion to this man?
Yeah.
Sure, please.
Things. I would put money, not knowing anything about him, that this guy's wearing a t-shirt and shorts. That's number one, all the time. And number two, have your super go in there, check his windows, put some caulking around the windows so that there's no cold air coming in that way. You know, check some of those points of air entering the apartment. Like Lee was telling us where his girlfriend, now wife, had her window open a little bit. Those are the things that can help you with this person who's calling HPD 5 times a day.
And done that.
And they still call. Okay.
The lady calls up my office at 11 at night, leaves a message on the emergency service that it is freezing in her apartment. The radiator is ice cold. When we look at the sensor in her apartment rings at 72.
Mm.
So I don't know what to do with her. When
Buy
we
her a
go in
blanket.
there,
Killer.
what's that?
I said, buy her a blanket.
Yeah.
So, you know, like as Natasha said, some tenants do like to just call HPD. You're never going to get away from it. There are some tenants that do that. You know, the best thing you do is you have the data, you go up, you take a temperature reading, you have the temperature sensor in the apartment, you document it, and you show them. You say, look, the apartment is warm enough. I can't overheat the building. Like, I just can't overheat every other apartment to make your, you know, apartment warmer. Like, I highly recommend putting on warmer clothes. And as Sandy said, sometimes even just some vanity stuff can help. You know, you caulk the window, you know, a couple spots, and, you know, sometimes people feel
He's done that.
trying it.
He's actually done that.
Yeah.
Even covered over the air conditioner, put insulation all around, everything.
Can you convince the tenant, can you take out the air conditioners entirely, store it for the tenant downstairs somewhere, tell them you'll bring them back up in the spring, because that is a real problem, the air conditioners. They
I
really,
agree with you, but the comment to that was, don't you touch my air conditioner.
There are
I
some
don't know legally if does he have the right to remove as the landlord, Lee, do we have the right to remove the air conditioner?
No, you don't.
Okay.
Other questions?
Well, I'm just gonna call you back for the name of your engineer anyway.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can, if you want to email me, it's Lee@Runwise. I can respond that way, or you can email support. The gentleman that I recommend, his name is Ralph Germain. He does a lot of, he's very honest and does a lot.
Very good, very good.
Yeah, he does a lot of this type of work. Like I wouldn't bring him in for little stuff, but like if you're really having a problem, he'd be the person I trust.
Okay.
I have a question about how I manage things because I'm generally just looking most of the time on my phone if I'm not sitting here at my desk. And I periodically turn certain sensors off where I think they're dragging the system down or they're making the system run more. I just turn them off. And one person's unit is running hot all the time, and I frankly have just turned them off so they don't skew the system. Am I just wasting the sensor having it there?
You know, even when somebody has it, like sometimes they'll have a space heater and like you'll see it shoots up, and
Yeah.
like we do try to detect that and auto eliminate, but it's not perfect. And so if you actually know it, yeah, I think disabling it is fine. If you're going to leave it disabled permanently forever and you have, then yeah, I would move it somewhere else. Why not? But it's not, you know, typically you only need about 10-15% coverage to get a pretty good basis on the building.
Mhm.
So you don't need every sensor to be perfectly, you know, in use.
All right, because we have both north and south exposures on most of our units. And as is typical, the north side is always colder. And it's, you know, it's hard because these are 12-foot ceiling heights and a lot of cubic space.
Yeah.
And some units just do not have sufficient radiators or radiation.
Yeah.
Or I go back to my old phrase now, is just screw them.
If anybody has a complaining tenant, just
Like
send them
that, Dan?
Aaron will take care of them.
I'm a tough New Yorker.
Other questions?
No, that now I pretty much know how it works. We just connect the says I'm too cold. I'll walk in with like a little heat sensor, just to monitor the temperature inside the apartment, check windows, definitely reach out to support link to see how I can get additional sensors for additional units that do not have sensors. Keep an adequate control because temperatures are low for the building. If I'm still cold, but your neighbor's hot, then that's gotta be something with you inside your apartment.
Good summary. Yep. Ulan, you have a question?
No, I have more like, so what she was explaining. I have a tenant that in her room, she got like, there are two thermostats, one in the living room and one in her room. Now, when we go in her room, she got thin curtains, as you see behind me. This is the typical window that we have in most of the apartments. And they have a little bit, like you said, at the top.
Yeah.
And she had thin curtains, but she have furniture blocking the radiator because we have the wall unit. And about like 4 feet of the radiator exposed, and she be complaining that her room is real cold and carrying on. I had brought in the plumbers to they had a thermal thing, the gun, and they showed her, the heat was escaping from the radiator. I mean, not from the radiator, from the window, from the air condition and everything. So I was telling her, and the guy telling her that she had to move her furniture back at least 6 inches away from the radiator so they can get some air and to get some blackout curtains, you know what I'm saying, so that she can get adequate heat. Now, she started up again with the same thing, complaining, and that she won't change these, like she won't move the furniture, she won't get the blackout curtains, she won't cover up the radiator. I mean, not the radiator, I mean the air conditioning. It's just crazy.
Maybe, I mean, look, people can be very difficult everywhere, but maybe one solution is to see if you can convince her not to move it permanently, but just move it for a week and say, let's see what happens. And then if you actually have a sensor in that unit, you can show her, hey, look, you got an extra 2 degrees by doing this. It's up to you whether you want to keep it this way or not, but like, this is the net result. And if it doesn't, then you also know, like, hey, it hasn't been that effective. We need to try something else if it's still cold there.
Lee, you just touched on something. I think it would be worthwhile, and I'm going to do this in some of my apartments where I have the chronic complainers, is just buy an extra sensor to put in their apartment, not so
Yeah.
much to affect the system, but to monitor the temperature in their apartment and to have a written record
Yep.
to show them and HPD if there are complaints that the temperature is maintained at an adequate level.
Absolutely. We highly recommend that. If you have severe complainers, you definitely want to do it. Jan, I'm going to go to you, but I just want to read. Natasha asked, where is the best place to have a sensor? Bedroom, hallway, living room? It doesn't really matter. You just want to make sure it's a space people spend time and it's not near a window or any type of anything that would generate heat like a kitchen. And other than that, it's if somebody complains, hey, my bedroom is specifically cold, you can put or move a sensor there, but it doesn't, otherwise there's no real critical, like specific. Jan, what were you had a question?
Yes, what's the most effective material with which to cover a air conditioner unit? You mentioned a plastic. Would carpeting, mattress covers, what
There
combination?
are weatherproofing kits you can get at Home Depot. They have material that ranges from clear plastic to like metallic plastic, and it comes with special weatherproofing tape. And you can literally seal the thing. You know, as I think somebody said earlier, it's not perfect. Like, you're still better, definitely better removing the air conditioner for sure. But if you can't remove the air conditioner, at least doing that is helpful.
Thank you.
Tiffany wrote, tenant complained about sensor being installed by ceiling as heat rises and then will deter sensors. Yeah, sensors should not be near the ceiling unless they were requested to be there for aesthetic or other reasons. Like, they should generally be at eye level and not near an outward facing wall and not near as a kitchen or other, you know, source. If the sensor is in the wrong place, email or call our support team. We'll walk you through how to move it, or we'll send somebody out to do that.
Also, in that case, a picture is always helpful, just so if there is anything that needs correction on our side, we can actually show them, hey, this is how this was done. We want to make sure this doesn't get repeated.
Thanks.
Oh, any other questions or anything else anybody wants to cover today?
No, this was very helpful. So I can explain to the tenants. They say I'm too cold, but the building's at temperature. I was like, well, that's the building, not my apartment. That means something's got to be wrong inside the apartment, or it's not the dress too loose, too light layers of clothing, an open window, or there's a gap somewhere, either by the window, a P-tack unit, there's some type of air leak when the heat is going out, or the valves are not on, or something's not correct inside the unit. So
Yeah. I mean, that's something to definitely, you want to dig into that. And again, our support team are happy to help you do that if you just email or call them. Also, we're going to make a recording of this available, and we'll send it out to everybody if you want to forward it on. And lastly, I publish regular information on LinkedIn about this type of stuff. So if you are on LinkedIn, you want to follow me, I just pasted the link right there. You're welcome to follow me. We're going to start a video series too. That's sort of like, you know, quick 2-3 minute educational stuff on property management, and you can get those videos there. Anything else before we close it up?
Dan, I just sent you an email. So just alerting you that I sent you an email.
I'll look right away.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much.
Very helpful.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you.
No problem. Thank everybody. Thank you all for coming. We really
Thank you,
appreciate
Lee.
it.
Thank you,
One of
Dan.
these every couple of weeks. So
Thank you, everyone.
we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you all.